Snow came early that year. It blanketed the hills like a shroud, turning every tree into a sculpture of stillness. Smoke curled softer from chimneys, boots grew heavier, and the creek behind the cabin sang in a lower voice, as if even water felt the hush. Inside the cabin, something had shifted, not loudly, not like breaking glass, but like the quiet realignment of the earth underfoot. Mr. Rourke had begun leaving her space. He no longer hovered, no longer barked orders. He still said little, but sometimes left wood stacked near the hearth without being asked, sometimes nodded when passing her, like a man unsure if he owed an apology or admiration. She didn't need either. One night, a fierce wind rolled down from the mountains, a breath from some older world, full of teeth. The sky turned red at the horizon, a warning the trees already understood. She was asleep in the loft, when the smell woke her. Not smoke from the chimney, something thicker, a wrongness in the air. She rolled over, blinked, and saw the flickering orange bleeding through the floorboards. She didn't scream. She moved, quickly, down the ladder, across the room, flames licking the far wall. The stovepipe cracked. Heat bloomed where it shouldn. Single quotes to Mr. Rourke wasn't there. He'd gone into town that afternoon. She was alone, almost, the dog. His old hound, near blind, half deaf, still loyal, trapped near the back room, whimpering. She wrapped her shawl round her arms, coughed through the rising smoke, and crawled low through the heat. The doorframe groaned. The ceiling hissed. She found the dog curled under the cot, frozen in fear. "Come," she whispered, voice raw. He didn't move, so she lifted him, all 40 trembling pounds, into her arms, shielding his face with her sleeve. By the time she made it outside, the fire had taken the roof. The porch collapsed behind her. She stood in the snow, boots sinking, breath torn from her lungs, and watched the place she had cleaned, mended, made gentle, burn by morning. There was nothing left but smoke, black ribs of wood, ash that danced when the wind passed, and her standing still, holding the dog like it was the last warm thing in the world. The townsfolk came, first Mrs. Tilby, then Nora and her mother, then Silas, then the rancher. He came fast, without a coat, eyes wild until they found her. She didn't run to him, she just saw him, and that was enough. He stepped forward, silent, took the dog from her arms, set it gently on the snow, then, without a word, wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She leaned into him like a tired song returning. Home, Mr. Rourke arrived just before dusk. He stared at the wreckage like it owed him an explanation. When he saw her, there was something in his face, not softness, not sorrow, respect, not the kind that's loud or proud, the kind that's late. He nodded at her and walked away. Days passed. The town rebuilt the porch first, then the well, then, bit by bit, the rest. Not the same as before. Better, stronger, quieter, quieter. She didn't move back into the cabin. Instead, she moved down the road, past the creek, beyond the pine with the bent trunk, to a smaller home being built with wide windows and a south-facing porch. The rancher's land, but not just his anymore. They never spoke of love in loud words. No one asked if they were married. No one needed to. She planted herbs outside the door. He carved her a rocking chair. On winter nights, she played the fiddle, not always in tune, but always with soul. Sometimes she sang, and when she did, even the wind hushed to listen. Nora visited often, sat at her feet and asked stories. "Were you ever scared?" she once asked. Wide dash. The woman, no longer just a girl, smiled and answered, "Not of fire, not of wolves, only of disappearing." Nora frowned. "But you're here now." She nodded. "Yes, and I'm staying." One morning, the wildflowers bloomed early, bright, defiant, alive. She crouched to touch them, her fingers tracing the petals like pages from an old life. Behind her, the rancher stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. He said nothing. He never needed to. He saw her, and she had never needed. Saving just space, and someone willing to sit beside her silence long enough to hear the truth beneath it. They say he paid her to clean his cabin once, but what she cleaned was deeper than wood or soot. She cleared out the rot in their silence, swept shame off the floorboards of her soul, and when the fire came, she didn't run. She rose. Not every woman needs rescuing. Some just need to be seen. And if you ever meet one, sit still, stay quiet, and let her show you how the wild can heal. The wind changed, not in temperature, but in tone, a quieter kind of threat, like the sky holding its breath. The wildflowers she planted by the window began to wilt early, as if they sensed something before she did. Even the birds near the creek flew shorter circles, keeping to themselves. Something was coming. The letter arrived with the midweek mail. Mrs. Tilby didn't open it, but her hands trembled as she passed it across the counter to Mr. Rourke. "It's addressed to you," she said, "but it mentions a girl." Said someone's looking. He took it without thanks, tore it open there and then. By the time he finished reading, the coffee in his mug had gone cold. That night, she was on her knees, scrubbing the back steps. The boards had gone soft from rain, and she worked like someone trying to coax life out of the wood. He stood in the doorway, holding the letter like a snake in his hand. "You lied," he said. She didn't look up. "You didn't come from nowhere." Still, she said nothing. "I don't take kindly to liars," he spat. "Man back east looking for you. Says you ran. Says you're his." Now she looked at him slowly, like turning toward thunder you already knew was coming. "I'm not anyone's." That what she told him to. She stood, not afraid, just weary. "I told him I couldn't breathe." In town, whispers spread like fire on dry sage. "She's a runaway." Some say he was her husband, others say her father, maybe both. She was bought or stolen or broken. None of it was the truth, but parts of it weren't lies either. The rancher found her by the water, the same place they always met, beneath the pine with the half-bent trunk. She didn't hear him approach, just sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, hair falling in sheets down her back. He didn't speak at first, just settled beside her, the way one sits next to grief, gently, with respect. "I never asked where you came from," he said. "After a while, I know I won't now, either, unless you want me to." Silence. Then I left a place where silence was a punishment, where they locked doors, not to keep danger out, but to keep me in. She didn't cry, her voice didn't crack, but the truth still bled through, soft and slow. I ran one night, barefoot, took nothing, not even shoes, just breath, and even that felt stolen. He looked down at her feet, boots still too big, still tied with twine, and in that moment, he saw her not as the girl the town whispered about, but as the woman who chose to survive. At the cabin, she began packing her things, quietly, deliberately. Rourke stood in the doorway, Well, you go now. I don't know, she said, folding her shawl. You think he won't come for you again? She paused. Her hand lingered on the wooden edge of the bed frame. Let him. I'm not hiding any more. He nodded once, stiffly, almost respectfully. But he didn't ask her to stay. That night, she sat on the porch, alone, the fiddle in her lap. She played, no notes, just held it close, like it might remember her hands when she was gone the next morning. Just before sunrise, a horse's hooves touched down near the cabin. It was him, the rancher. He dismounted without a word, walked up the steps, stopped when he saw her with her bag at her feet. You leaving? I have too. He looked at the bag, then back at her. No, he said, you don't. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, not because of the words, but because of how gently they were spoken. He stepped forward. Just enough. You don't owe anyone your pain, he said. But if you choose to stay, let it be for you. She looked down at her hands, scarred, calloused, small, and nodded. Not for him, not for Rourke, not even for the town, but for the girl who once ran barefoot in the night and had nowhere left to run. That day she stayed. She unpacked slowly, swept the floor as if making a place for something new. Then she went outside and pressed her palms into the soil by the porch, dug her fingers into the earth like it might anchor her heart. She replanted the wilted flowers, and this time she watered them. The next time she walked to the woods, the rancher was already waiting. They didn't speak, but he held out his hand, open, not to take, but to offer, and she reached out, not to be saved, but to say, I'm still here. Autumn came like a hymn, slow, golden, and aching with memory. The wind carried stories in it now, brushing through the trees as if they, too, were listening. And in the hush of that changing season, something quieter began to grow. She swept the porch each morning as if brushing away ghosts, collected kindling in a woven basket, smoothed creases from the curtains with hands that once trembled, but now moved with a kind of peace, the peace of someone who knew pain, and had chosen softness anyway. Mr. Rourke grew used to her presence, the way one grows used to the sound of a clock ticking, first unnoticed, then strangely missed when it stops. He watched her sometimes over his cup of coffee, his eyes narrowed not in suspicion, but in something that resembled confusion. She wasn't what he expected. One day, she found the cabin's old rocking chair split at the leg. She took it outside, sat on the steps with the pieces spread around her. With strips of cloth and melted pine sap, she mended it quietly under the shadow of the pines. When she brought it back inside, it creaked a little less, and so did he. He nodded at the chair. You do that. She only dipped her head and said, seemed a shame, letting it die. But kindness doesn't always call kindness forward. One evening, the sky bruised purple, and the chill came early. She had just set stew on the hearth. He walked in from chopping wood, sweat along his brow, eyes restless. He sat, stared at her as she stirred the pot. You know, he said, voice low, you don't gotta keep sleeping in that loft. She paused. The ladle in her hand didn't tremble, but it stilled mid-air. There's room here. I wouldn't mind. He stood and stepped closer, a clumsy offering in the way his hands reached toward her hair. She turned slowly, not frightened, not angry, just tired. That's not why I'm here. Just 6 words, but they split the air like lightning through a dry sky. He stepped back, grunted. Shame sat stiff on his shoulders. He didn't mention it again the next day. She didn't come inside until nightfall. Instead, she walked past the cabin and into the woods. And that's when she saw him, the other man, a rancher she'd passed once before, mending fence wire near the tree line. He was there again, coat slung over a post, arms elbowed deep in rope. His eyes were steady, hands rough, not from violence, but honest work. A man who spoke little and listened much. Their eyes met across a field of brittle grass. He gave her a small nod. Not an invitation, not a command, just ... permission to be. She walked past him without speaking. The next day, she found herself walking that same path again, and the day after, again, by the third time. He offered her a glove from his pocket, without asking why her knuckles were chapped. She took it, wore it on her left hand, said nothing, but something in her loosened. Just a little dot. Mr. Rourke noticed her absence those afternoons. She wandering off somewhere, he asked once, tossing a log into the fire. She looked up from mending a blanket. Just air, HMPH. Don't let wolves take you. She said nothing. She already knew which wolves to fear. In the woods, her footsteps grew softer. She began to collect things, stones shaped like hearts, wild herbs with healing roots, a feather she tied around her wrist. The rancher, she never asked his name, started walking with her, never beside her at first, just behind or ahead. Then one day, their steps matched without planning. They passed a doe and her fawn once, just standing still together, watching. Neither of them said a word, but both smiled like they shared a secret. Back at the cabin, her silence returned, but it felt fuller now, like a song with no words. Mrs. Tilby noticed her skin looked clearer, that her shoulders sat straighter. Girls starting to look like herself. She told the baker's wife. Who is she, then? Someone who remembers how to stand, Tilby said. That week, she found a broken fiddle in the cabin attic. Its strings snapped, body cracked. She cleaned it gently, oiled the wood, restrung it from thread and wire. At night, she sat on the porch alone and played just one note, long and low, until even the crickets went quiet to listen. The rancher heard it once, passing by on horseback. He stopped, hand over his chest, didn't speak, didn't move, just ... Listened, Silas, the rancher's old friend, noticed. You're out here more these days, he told the younger man, tightening a saddle strap. There's music in the woods. Now, the rancher replied. You chasing a bird or a girl. He smiled, slow. Sometimes they're the same. Back in the cabin, the girl planted a line of wildflowers near the window. Just a few seeds she'd tucked in her pocket long ago. When Mr. Rourke asked why, she simply said, cabins shouldn't look like sorrow. He didn't argue. But he never watered them. Either Nora, the little girl, visited again, brought a doll with a missing arm. Can you fix her? The girl nodded, took the doll, stitched her gently with the same thread she used on the fiddle, gave her a red ribbon from her own hair. Now she's braver, Nora said, hugging it tight. She's got a scar like me. The girl smiled. Scars make stories stay. That night, the wind picked up. The cabin creaked like it remembered storms. She sat near the fire, staring into the orange glow. You ever been in love? Mr. Rourke asked out of nowhere. She didn't answer for a long time. Then, I've been seen. Once. He didn't press further. He just stared at her face, shadowed by flame. and realized, with a twist of something he couldn't name, that he had never really looked at her at all. The next day, she didn't come to clean. She didn't come at all. He waited until dusk, then again until the moon rose. The hearth sat empty, the floor unswept. He poured his coffee and tasted nothing. The clock ticked louder than usual, but across the hills, in the hush of the trees, two figures walked. In silence, not holding hands, not even close, but every now and then their shadows touched, and it was enough. The wagon creaked through the desert dusk like an old man breathing his last. It carried sacks of barley, a barrel of lamp oil, and one girl no one had been waiting for. She sat near the back, knees to chest, a canvas sack clutched close as if it held her ribs in place. The driver hadn't asked questions. She had offered no name, only paid in crumpled bills and a silver hairpin, far too fine for the rest of her. The town of Willows End was the kind of place that tried to forget its own name. Dust hung in the air like memory. The saloon sign swung sideways. The church bell hadn't rung since the preacher left 3 winters ago. She stepped down onto the cracked dirt, like a feather might land on the surface of a still lake. Quiet, but noticed by the ripple. She couldn't have been more than 19. Her boots were 2 sizes too big and tied with rag twine. Her dress, patched and faded, hung like a borrowed story on her frame. But her eyes, Lord above, her eyes were full of old winds and faraway hurt. Eyes that had seen something and swallowed it whole. The townsfolk looked up from porches and half-eaten plates. They watched her walk, not out of malice, but because something about her presence shifted the air. Like when an owl flies low at midday. Unnatural, but soft. She walked toward the post office. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe she walked toward nowhere, but the cabin found her anyway. Mr. Rourke stood outside the general store, a list in one hand, a cigar in the other. Middle-aged, with shoulders like barn beams and a jaw too used to clenching. He didn't smile often. His kindness, when it showed, came in the form of grunts and coin. He needed someone to clean the cabin. The last girl had left when the roof leaked on her bedding, and the mice weren't polite. He saw her, watched her ask Miss Tilby, the postmistress, something with her hands curled awkwardly, not quite begging, but near it. Miss Tilby pointed toward him. He looked her over, as one might inspect a mule that wandered too close. "You clean?" he asked. She nodded once. "You cook?" A pause, then another nod, more cautious. "I'll pay 75 cents a week. You sleep in the side loft. Don't touch the ledger, you hear?" "I hear," she said, voice like wind in tall grass. There and gone before you knew what it meant. He handed her a folded scrap of paper with his name and a single word. Northridge. That was it. No welcome, no warning. Just the offer of a bed beneath, wood and work. The trail to Rourke's cabin curled through thin woods, then climbed. It was half a day's walk, and she didn't ask for a ride. When she arrived, the sun was dragging its last light over the pines. The cabin stood hunched among the trees like a man unsure of his place. The roof sagged. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and half-hearted dot inside. It smelled of tobacco and damp wool. Dust coated the shelves like skin no one had brushed in years. Pots stacked in the sink. Boots near the hearth. A rifle leaning lonely in the corner. He showed her the loft, a narrow crawl above. The kitchen with a straw bed and a stitched quilt, so faded it could have once been any color. "You stay out of the pantry unless told," he said, then left her to settle. She didn't unpack, only smoothed the blanket and sat for a long while, hands folded, listening to the silence like it might say something if she waited long enough. In the days that followed, she became part of the cabin's rhythm. She scrubbed floors until the knots in the wood blinked through their grime. She patched torn curtains, wiped soot from the windows, and found a bird's nest above the beam, 3 pale eggs inside. She never took them down. She cooked quietly. 2 stew thick with wild onions, bread with rough edges. He never said thank you, but he ate every bite. When she washed his shirts, she hung them on a line between 2 crooked pines. On those days, the forest looked like it was wearing sleeves. The townsfolk asked questions in corners. "She's got that mule quiet in her," said old Harris at the saloon. "She don't blink right," muttered the grocer's wife. "Like she's listening to something behind you." Mrs. Tilby just said, "Girls got eyes full of storms. Leave her be," and they mostly did. One afternoon, when the light was slant and gold, a child named Nora found her kneeling near the creek behind the cabin, washing linens with a bar of yellow soap. "Are you the new ghost lady?" Nora asked, barefoot and freckled. The girl smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen her teeth. "Not a ghost," she whispered. "Papa says Mr. Rourke's mean as a bull with a toothache." The girl shrugged, twisting water from a sheet. "Even bulls get tired." Nora sat cross-legged in the grass, watching her work, like it was some kind of magic. That's how it began. Not with love, not with drama, but with a child sitting by a stranger and calling her real. One night, she hummed. Just 3 notes, low, lilting, strange, like something from the old world before radios and railways. Mr. Rourke, reading by the fire, looked up. "What is that?" She looked surprised, almost guilty. "A lullaby. You got children?" She shook her head, then added, "Used to sing it to myself when the dark felt heavy." He stared at her a moment too long, then looked back at his page. The fire crackled. The lullaby vanished that week. He gave her an old shawl, said nothing, just left it folded on the bench. She wore it like armor. He paid her every Saturday. Coins slid onto the table like apologies. Too late, she said thank you, always. Folded them into a tin, tucked it under a floorboard. She never spent a cent. No one knew where she came from, but some guessed she had nowhere left to go, and still she swept every corner of that house like she believed it deserved to be whole.